Welcome, everyone. We have an excellent event today. I know because every time I have listened to Professor Ghabra, I've also always learned so much. We're very happy to be hosting him today, and it's my distinct honor to welcome him and introduce him to this event this afternoon. I will just briefly introduce Professor Ghabra, and then we will have time for discussion and question and answer. Dr. Shafeeq Ghabra is Professor of Political Science at Kuwait University, and currently, for the year 2016 and 17, visiting scholar at the Arab Center for Research in Qatar. He served as the founding president of the American University of Kuwait, was the director of the Kuwait Information Office in Washington, D.C., and the Center for Strategic Studies at Kuwait University. He's the author of many books, including Palestinians in Kuwait, The Family and the Politics of Survival, Kuwait and the Dynamics of State and Society, and Unsafe Life, The Generation of Dreams and Disappointments. Unsafe Life is, in Arabic, Haya Ghayr Amina, which is currently being translated into English and hopefully forthcoming soon at the end of this year. He continues to write prolifically, including recent publications such as Kuwait at the Crossroads via the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and the Egyptian Revolution of 2011 in the Routledge Handbook of the Arab Spring. And this year, 2 more works are set to be published, The Nakba and the Emergence of the Palestinian Diaspora, via the Arab Center in Beirut in Arabic, and Identity and State in the Gulf, The Case of Kuwait, in State, Citizens, and Institutions from IB Taurus. If you are in the region and follow the news on a regular basis, you know Professor Ghabra is very often in the news as a regular, frequent commentator on news channels, but also has a weekly column in Al-Watan and a bi-monthly column in Al-Haya newspapers. So if you sign up for his list, you will be getting regular updates of all his writings, and they're always very informative. Just briefly, Dr. Ghabra has a BA from Georgetown University, his MA from Purdue University, and his PhD from the University of Texas, Austin. We are very honored to host you here with us today, and thank you for joining us. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ghabra.
Well, thank you very much for your warm introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've been here more than one time, and it's always been a thrill to be at Harvard and to be able to share ideas more than anything else. So what I will do in this evening is, I'll talk a little bit about the setting, the environment that leads us to where we are in the Arab world. Then I will speak about the Arab state response and the way it is dealing with this complex environment, which includes several subheadings that relates to Islam, Islamists, not Islamists. It relates to Shia and Sunni. It relates to ISIS. But how are the Arab states in general, or in particular, depending, dealing with the environment? And then my concluding remarks, like a balance sheet of where are we now and where are we heading. So this is my outline, and hope that can bring about the kind of discussion that can help us all understand the situation better. So the setting. First, it is more than impossible to look at the Arab world without a long view. A short view is always going to be full of surprises. And a long view, nothing in this region is different or unusual than anything we've seen in other regions of the world or anything we've seen in the European history itself. It is ironic at the same time. These are just thoughts on this environment. It is ironic at the same time that over the decades, the hardline regimes in the region spent incredible resources, energy and time, discrediting the non-violent opposition and the moderate forces in their societies. They created an assumption. Either the status quo or the extreme radicals or the jihadists. And there was no choice in the middle. That's another thought to keep with us as we try to understand the existing situation in the region. Well, in 2011, the Arab world broke the deadlock. It wasn't an either-or situation. From Morocco to Bahrain, from Cairo to Syria, all over the region, from the Gulf to other places, there was a movement that erupted, and it was cross-state, cross-section, cross-group, and it had an impact on the entire region. And it wasn't armed. It was non-violent. It stayed like that in some places. It didn't in others, due to the response of the states. My assumption is that by not listening to the 2/11 messages behind this moment, the moment of 2/11, the Arab world is today stuck in a quagmire. By not responding positively to the energies of the youth who came out in 2/11, the Arab world is facing the most complex challenges it is facing. The state response. And that takes me to my core of the talk, which is the Arab state response. And I believe that's where much of the problem came to express itself later. So the stable states were fully alarmed by the revolutions. It took them by surprise, and they were determined to stop it one way or another. Let's call it the counter-revolution. In this context, we can understand the coup in Egypt in 2013 and the rolling of GCC tanks into Bahrain. And you can look at so many details to talk about this aspect, the response. The counter-revolution created an environment where the deep state sought to contain the revolutions not through reform, clashing with demonstrators and imposing new unprecedented restrictions. Political and public expression was restricted as well. In the process, regimes initiated new laws in order to face what they saw as a revolutionary fever in the region. So tens of thousands of activists who were committed to peaceful change were jailed across the region. Thousands killed, many left their countries to take refuge in other countries, Europe, Turkey, etc. Unfortunately, the leading elites in the region after the Arab Spring surrounded themselves with new walls, not necessarily physical walls, but really solid mental walls. And that these walls became the base for further degeneration and for civil wars. In many cases, the elites stopped seeing citizens in the demonstrators, but in many cases, terrorists. And some elites and regimes in the region today fear a small slogan, a booklet actually, not even a book, a song, an expressive dance, anything that reminds them of change. So elites are tense. We have to understand this today with respect to the changes surrounding them. This includes their failure to address the issues of unemployment, corruption, not any corruption, extreme corruption, blunt corruption, and violations of human rights across the region. The Arab challenge today is a moral challenge. None of the strong are seeing the weak, nor does those who have privilege see and understand the underprivileged. The collapse of the Arab order in this context is a result of historical processes such as occupation in Palestine. That's very much into the situation, underlining and involved in it. International interventions, US and other wars, the role of oil, the positive, but you could see the negative. Arab elites versus non-elites, issues of education, monopoly of power, corruption, injustice, greed, dictatorship, and marginalization. That's the powder cake. So this is a result of the mismanagement of an entire situation, deeper than just 2/11, but 2/11 was a chance that was missed. So on the other hand, the divisions between Islamists and non-Islamists played into the hands of the established elites who avoided a focus on reform. The rise of the Muslim Brothers in the region, Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, among others. There are positive examples as well. But it added to the fears of regimes and the deep states and the entrenched interests. The older structure, particularly in Egypt, found in the brothers' lack of flexibility and limited experience in governance a way to make a comeback. Did it do any better? Definitely not. It did worse. But it added to the heaviness of the problem. So in a way, we are in a state of exception. State of emergency in the region. The activists have been reduced to mere numbers in courts, in jails, in places of torture. A few months ago, there was a very interesting New York Times article which talked about activists in the region, what happened to them. Very true. And if we go back and see that article just last summer. So the Sunni-Shia divide is also an extension of all of this management. It's not an inborn problem among people. Those of us who can go back to the 70s, most of you here don't, but remember a time when Shia and Sunni and Christian and Muslim, etc., was beyond the debate. You saw another person as maybe a Ba'athi or a leftist or a communist or a socialist or a pro-American or an anti-American, but you didn't see them as Shia or Sunni. So the Sunni-Shia divide today is not far from the counter-revolution. This divide, an example of that is Bahrain. It was a civil rights issue. Suddenly, it was turned in another direction. So this divide has a rationale. Now, let us see, on the one hand, Iran supported the Syrian regime, correct? It actually encroached on Iraq and its independence. It interfered in Yemen. It interfered in Lebanon. But on the other hand, the forces facing the other side, facing the Iranians, facing their extension, didn't have a democratic vision as well. And therefore, this counter-revolution looked at the social, political dimension from the divide point of view and therefore insisted on identity politics in the counter. So you ended up with a politics of the established elites in the region that has played into identity politics rather than human rights and equality and the vision for all Syrians or all Iraqis or all Egyptians or all Yemenis and or Libyans. So in a way, the elites didn't have much vested interest in a democratic resolution of the problem. That was even better. You divide this way, and then everybody's core group will somehow become dependent on them. So this takes us to ISIS. ISIS, the Islamic State, was the latest of the extremist and simple ideologies aiming at filling the vacuum created by intense social, political, and economic challenges. It's part of this counter lack of, just to make a little, 2011 was the most peaceful year the Arab world has seen in a long time in terms of terrorism, because it was the most optimistic and hopeful year for youth in the entire region. It's the mismanagement of 2011 and its messages that has produced again the magnitude that we see with an organization like ISIS or again Al-Qaeda. So it stands at the other end of the peaceful protest, ISIS, and the peaceful revolutions. In many ways, ISIS represents a marginalized, traumatized group made up of segments of the Sunnis of Iraq and the Sunnis of Syria. The Islamic State is a result itself of the brutality of the Assad regime and the alienation enforced on Iraqi Sunnis in the past, and particularly since 2003, since the 2003 war in Iraq. Terrorism and violence also played into the hands of the counter-revolution. Played very well. Because then you can always say, look at the alternative. There are no peace activists. There are no genuine Democrats. There is nobody there. They're only terrorists. This is exactly where the region is being boxed into. The Syrian revolution, just to give an example, to make it maybe as clear as possible. The Syrian revolution was peaceful, non-violent. The regime of al-Assad at one point, that is, later in 2011, released all the jihadi individuals in jail. They were organized. The regime understood this. They were organizing in the jails itself. They were released. The aim of the Syrian intelligence then was to undermine the revolution that was gaining momentum, popularity, and international appeal. The jihadists released from jail formed Qaeda and formed Nusra and other jihadi groups such as ISIS. The Syrian regime had a clear understanding of how those individuals, once released, will go get organized, will find ways to get funding, will quarrel with themselves, will quarrel with the population, will create havoc and problems, and that the regime will win at the end. Now, on the other hand, I cannot blame ISIS criminality, which I call sometimes the Arab version of a Jacobian, the Jacobians of the French Revolution. I cannot blame ISIS criminality on Islam. In all religions, there is something for the fundamentalists, something for the extremists, and as well for the peaceful and for the compassionate. You can take and you can give in all religions. The Khmer Rouge of Cambodia were not just Marxists, like the Vietnamese. They were not even like the Chinese communists. They were not even secularists, like normal secularists. They were the extreme of the extreme. So, just wanted to clarify that point. The extreme Jacobians in the French Revolution, and maybe the extreme fundamentalists, some of the Muslim jihadists at the extreme, like ISIS, have more in common than with Christianity or with Islam. However, it's the socio-political structure of marginalization, persecution, relative deprivation, blocked future for youth, arrogance of regimes, lack of democracy, widespread corruption, foreign military intervention, occupation, have all been major factors in nurturing an environment of extremism in the region. If we don't see this, we are not seeing anything. It's in that context, if we review Iraq alone, death has been all over Iraq since the Iraq-Iran war in 1980. It starts with Saddam Hussein. Then 1990, the defeat, 1991. Then, after the invasion of Kuwait, the sanctions on Iraq. Then the US-led invasion in 2003. Then. It's all been violence. into the marginalization of the Sunnis of Iraq. So this is where one sees how ISIS has emerged. I mean, that level of destruction of the Iraqi state produced all of that. So far, governments are utilizing the war against ISIS and terrorism to undermine rights and the simplest expression of opinion in the region. I said that before, but I will say it again. This is happening in the same time of fighting terrorism. I mean, such a policy will only enhance terrorism. More youth activists and political opposition go today to jail, end up in exile, and thus more anger and violence and less legitimacy among the states. So that dynamic is wide open today in the region. The balance sheet, my final thoughts. Despite all of this history, the well-intentioned, centrist, humanist, and democratic values have more followers in Iraq and Syria and the rest of the Arab world than at any time in the past history of the region. Even at any time in my generation. I mean, we had people like that, but they were maybe in Lebanon, few of them, and around the Palestinian movement, but not beyond that. What is needed is a structure and a settlement for such beliefs to grow. So the Arab order today is in a state of disorder, despite some important, stable corners and countries that need to work hard on a reform plan. Most of the region is today sitting on a time bomb, composed of youth, who are 70% of the population, between the age up till the age of 30. And the youth of the region require more. I mean, they require more freedom, dignity, jobs, security, a happier life. They're looking for the same, what other youth are looking, from Romania all the way to the US. The average unemployment in the Arab world today stands at 30 to 35% in most countries. The majority of the Arabs today have a 30 to 35% unemployment, mostly youth. I will exclude few countries in the GCC with very small population, 300,000 or 1 million, but any number above 10 million and 12 million in any state in the region is facing immense and serious challenges with a whole range of issues. I mean, tens of billions are leaving the region, finances. Even before the revolutions, between 2003 and 2012, 750 billion left the region before 2012, which is in a way before the Arab Spring. So greed is a major issue in the region. None of the systems have a decent and capable progressive tax system. The forthcoming Arab report on justice, produced by a group of intellectuals under the direction of Dr. Rima Khalaf, when she was it was supposed to come in the name of the United Nations, but there was pressure not to produce it in the name of ESCWA and the United Nations. So it is being now produced separately by the group, the advisors and the group that wrote it, of which I was a member of, is a report on injustice in the Arab world. The name of it, injustice, the whole story of injustice, and what does it do? So today, Egypt is stuck with a military control of more than 30% of the economy. Very hard to make changes under such a model. It is clear that today a victory on the battlefield by any party, as happened in Aleppo just recently, doesn't mean that the nation has recovered. It marks the beginning of a long stage of dealing with armed groups and new ethnic and tribal divisions and whatever has emerged from the civil war. It takes much more to produce a solution. It looks that all the conflicts, the long now term conflicts started as rebellions against dictators and then turned into civil wars can only be resolved through major compromises between the major components of the rebellions and the remnants of the regime or of the state. But for this to happen, there has to be an empowerment of the Syrian people. There has to be an empowerment of the opposition. There has to be a resolution of the issues and the problems that in the first place brought about a revolution. So you tell me you're going to go back to the status quo under authoritarian dictatorship, you find a new face, and then you're going to bulldoze the population. It doesn't work. You have to find a serious resolution that empowers people, that finds a place for them under what they are looking for in terms of human rights and all the issues that made them revolt in the first place. So this also means that for any real solution, the Assad regime, his immediate aides, must at some point be out of power. Command-based structures in the region, emptied from any discussion or debate, also face challenges. Let's example visions 2020, visions 2030, and maybe 2040, 2050 will not get anywhere. For one simple factor, there is no political or human rights or justice dimension or that deals with it. So how are you going to move an economy as big as these economies with such visions without a deep, at least component that deals with the human capital, the human beings, parties, political reform? It is political at the core. And if we do not deal with the political, there will be no resolution. On the contrary, these plans could turn into nightmares. I also propose that the youth of the region will not go back to their former state of apathy. So it's politicized. I mean, the way Americans now are being politicized. They're entering politics for some reason or for another reason. Just want to go become activists and change, and they're going to go elect after 2 years to change in Congress, and then after 4 years they're going to look for a new situation, and the new, and the Democratic Party is going through an overhaul, and etc. We, the Arabs, are witnessing the biggest, the deepest, largest politicization process ever experienced in the Arab world since I can remember. Since even maybe Arab nationalism, then there was that, but this looks much deeper. This looks much, it's affecting everybody. It's at a huge magnitude. We never had that amount of refugees. I mean, 50-60% of the Arab world is in civil wars today. Never had that magnitude of states collapsing totally. It's like moments of truth. You have to get politicized. Like Americans are experiencing a moment of truth, but it's a nicer moment of truth. I wish we had a moment of truth like this, like the one Americans have, because this moment of truth, you just have a chance to change it to another moment of truth. In our case, no. Several millions will die before we get to our moment of truth. It will destroy the region to get to our moment of truth. Maybe you understand how a Gaddafi can be built. In our case, you get one, they never go. And there is no mechanism to get them to go. And there is no way they will go. And they will become the truth and the only truth. And you will become nothing. The whole population. So this is the struggle today, the Middle East, to regain its identity, to regain itself, its history, its structure, its belief in itself, its identity. Somehow youth in the Arab world are the engine of all of this, and they will not go back home anymore. They either go very radical, or you invite them to a reform, peace-oriented, non-violent, peaceful methods, non-violent methods to change the situation and to hold as much as possible under the difficult circumstances of extreme repression that exists in that part of the world. Not much, because at the end of the day, there's too much pressure. They're put in a pressure cooker. There is. You're not even letting it steam. I mean, where is this? How do you get the steam out? They cannot go to Europe. They cannot come to America. Not anymore. They cannot come. They cannot go anywhere. They're stuck. They have to make a stand. And I believe they will. They wanted to make that stand without paying a heavy price in 2011. They felt maybe they can be like Eastern Europe, maybe they can be like Latin America, make the change. Okay, 100 will die, 1,000 will die. It's okay, some of the police, and then you do the reforms, you move on. But then they discovered, no, it takes much more to clean up the mess that has been accumulating over the last 40 years. So this means we in the Arab world are entering an era of mass politics, activism, unionism, strikes, peaceful resistance, youth movements. This will keep expanding in the region in the years to follow. This will exist side by side with the inevitable violence in reaction to heightened levels of repression. You will see both. But I hope the more activism, the less violence. Some hope less violence. In Iraq or in Syria or in Sudan or in Jordan, I hope that activism can lead to the potential transformation. Without that, you end up with violence and failed states. Now, if the West keeps fighting violence as a priority without making a distinction between groups, causes, roots of anger, occupation, people and regimes, peaceful struggles and other struggles, then the West is going to keep feeding to the larger conflict and to its own failure in dealing with the region. So the Arab world so far has a couple of successful examples. I mean, one is the Tunisian example, which has somehow showed us that the Muslim brothers can be elected, then through elections they will leave, then maybe they will come back. You have in Morocco Muslim brothers in the prime minister working with other governments. The king made some reforms, not enough, not the end of the world, somehow half a loaf of change, but better than nothing, and could build on it. So these are some cases. I believe that the next Arab revolutionary wave will be more radical in thinking and in methods. I believe there will be another round. 211, round one, there will be another one. 220, 221, 222, but it's building. It's building. If you don't inject hope, it's coming. It will focus more on accomplishing what it did not accomplish in 211. And it will have a deeper anger level. And to deal with that is going to be difficult. Because those who made it through the revolutions of 211 may appear very soft compared to their younger brothers and sisters, coming to see how their brothers and sisters were hunted down, literally, for just saying no to something. That's building something. And you see that today at the grassroots level. These young were maybe 10 then, or 12, or 9, or 8. They'll be their 20s then. It will be a different story. And people have experience with organizing, experience with streets, experience with demonstrating, experience with dealing with the security, experience with dealing with lawyers, experience with everything. That is new. We had a generation that had no experience with any of that. So today, to sum up, I spoke about the setting in general, and then I spoke about the Arab state response, which I focused and believe that the main responsibility is on the way the Arab regimes and states responded to the 211 challenge. And then I gave some of my general remarks on how I see the situation in the future, today, the coming of rebellions and the need for reform, and how this could go side by side with violence, and if the West keeps focusing on violence, no reforms, no changes, we'll end up with a much more worse violence and a worse situation. And people are getting more organized and more able to have an impact, even when they use methods of violence. I mean, look at the battle in Mosul. Could you believe that a small organization like ISIS, with the primitive military capabilities, is holding the entire Iraqi army, plus all the support it gets from Iran, plus all the militias they have, totally outnumbered, can last in East Mosul for months, even around it for 6-7 months, just fighting, and then now West Mosul, and they keep. There's something there. I mean, this viciousness, this ability to fight, tells you something. But who's leading them? Many of the Iraqis who used to be with Saddam Hussein, who were defeated in 2003, who were demoralized then, who were in the Iraqi army that was not supposed to be dissolved, was dissolved, are taking their revenge now under the name of Islam, but could be under the name of anything. They're taking they're proving that they can fight after a big insult in 2003. So there's a lot to be seen in the region. This is what I want to say, and so my belief, when a region like this region, I mean, we're not talking about one country, we're talking about 22 countries. We're not talking about 2 states. We're not talking about a country with 10 million people that it can become like Somalia. We're talking about a region that has 400 million people, and there'll be soon 500 million. When a region goes through events such as these events experienced today in the Arab world, the saga will not end without a major transformation or a major catastrophe. We've seen the catastrophe so far. I'm hoping we'll see the transformation that can lead into a different future relative to the past. So in some countries, maybe it will lead to grassroots revolutionary situation, revolutionary forces, and in others it can lead to a grand deal with a possible solution, an agreement and compromise between elites that are enlightened, that could see what's coming, and they're ready to compromise, and the rest of their opposition. So in many ways, returning to corrupt authoritarianism will not stand in the region. People are beyond that. It will only, if we stay there, it will contribute to deeper conflict. So addressing the issue of authoritarianism mixed with corruption, lack of accountability, weak institutions, and I say democracy, is central in the region. It's a central piece that will allow this region to address the deeper issues, such as how they select their leaders and how they change their leaders, and the entire power configuration, and the whole issue of development, economic well-being, injustices, education, state and religion, women's rights, etc., etc. I will end here. Thank you very much.
Professor Ghabra, you've given us so much to think about. And at one point you were all depressed, another point you give us some hope. So I'm used to this, and that's always wonderful. I will open up for questions, but maybe I should just ask a quick question, because as a professor, you're always engaging with the younger generation, with the youth, whether in Kuwait or in other countries, and this gives you maybe a different perspective, because you're able to engage and learn more about what they're thinking. But I guess, what would you be telling your students at this point, maybe to give them hope in terms of what they should be doing, how they should be thinking about the future?
I tell my students many things, but on top, I really start with the micro. I definitely tell my students, work hard, study well, be competitive. I tell them, think critically, and I provide them material in Kuwait University that helps them think critically. And I tell them be safe. I honestly do. I tell them be safe. Because some of them, you have a student and then the second day he's in some demonstration or he's in some jail and beaten or mistreated, and then he comes out and he's on bail and etc. I say, okay, cool it down. Try. There is no way as a faculty member that I will tell my students anything but be capable. You're good, focus, try to do a PhD, try to do an MA, then you will be able maybe to help. But they don't listen to us, right? They don't listen to us, but at least you try to give them the tools of thinking that will help them make better decisions. And then to me, this is part of my role as a faculty member at Kuwait University.
And maybe part of your own experience.
And part of my own experience, which went through a lot of zigzags and etc. So in a way, yes, it's part of my own experience, which I put in my book, Unsafe Life.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll open up for questions. If you could introduce yourself when you ask, that would be great.
Nabila from Kuwait. You've mentioned the Palestinian issue while you were mentioning the turmoil that we're going through, while you were mentioning the 30 to 35% unemployment. I would like a better unpacking of that issue, because as a Kuwaiti of Palestinian origin, that remains at the core of the things that I believe in and what is important to me. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, you want to take several questions?
I think we can
So-
take one by one.
So on the issue of Palestine, it gains importance and loses importance when it comes to how states think. Some states today are thinking that by facing Iran, they can minimize their conflict with Israel. But for the Palestinians, this is a matter of life or death. It's their land that is under question. And therefore, the Palestinians today are in a state that is impacted by the entire region. On the one hand, the region is in turmoil, so they don't feel the same backing they used to. But on the other hand, their youth are like all the other youth in the region. They have the same feelings, the same willingness to organize, the same outreach, the same thinking and mentality. And I believe that today among the Palestinians there is a whole range of discussions on the future, on human rights, on the situation of an apartheid that exists today in the West Bank and around Gaza and in Jerusalem, on racism, on the so it's a constant state of flux. But there are 6 million Palestinians on the land, and there are another 6 to 7 million Palestinians in the diaspora. And just a day or two ago, in fact, I was invited to that conference and I couldn't make it. I made the commitment to come here. There was a conference of diaspora Palestinians. So I think Palestinians are also in a process of trying to organize, trying to salvage their issue, trying to bring about their cause again, and to look for what builds the momentum that somehow with more settlements, more marginalization, more taking of land is suffocating them around the wall and around all of that they may find different methods, different approaches. So a lot is today in the hands of the Palestinians and how they organize and how they respond. And other parts of it is in the hands of how does the region evolve. If the region finds compromises, finds a way out of this quagmire, the Palestinians will have a better situation. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel feels that he has an opportunity to push and push and push because the region is in a quagmire. And the Palestinians are not exactly where they're supposed to be. There was optimism many years ago. Today it's not there. So I think we're in the middle of all of this. But the Palestinians, I would definitely say, will not disappear. will continue to be very creative, highly educated, have capabilities. They lack organization. And I believe once they discover the new formula for the future of their existence, they will have to be reckoned with.
Haifa Al-Kailani, fellow Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard. Where are our future political leaders going to come from? If we're talking about this climate and this autocratic regimes, and that after the Arab Spring we have not made inroads, of course education has increased across the region and higher levels of education for men and women. But that does not translate itself immediately into democratic systems and into political future leaders. Where are they going to come from?
Okay, your question.
My name is Nadia Kafi. I'm a mid-career at HKS. My question is, you mentioned the vision 2020 and 2030. Don't you think this is kind of, a response to what the youth wants? Because it's more of, generating the economic opportunity, the job opportunities, and maybe this comes even before has more priority to the youth than the political engagement and the activism, as you mentioned.
I mean, you make a very good point. And let's say I could be wrong. But I personally don't believe in a plan that is not scrutinized in the public sphere. And I believe any plan not scrutinized, not well discussed beyond the small circle into a larger circle, a machine, a group, political parties, a people, a population, a press, where it can easily. So you may have somebody great starting a plan. 4 years from now, he is not there. Somebody else goes with the plan, but takes it into a dark side. You have no say. As long as you have no say, you're not going to get the results that you really think you're going to get. There is a chance you will. But there is a bigger chance you won't. Because, you see, we've been through that in the region many times. I mean, it's not that we didn't have leaders who came with such plans. I mean, wasn't Saddam Hussein, despite all the differences between leaders, who came with a vision and a plan about an Iraq of a certain caliber, but then it all went in a certain direction? Weren't there plans before this plan, and plans before this, and the one before, and the one before, and what happened to each one of them? Why didn't they produce? And what happened to the billions that were wasted on each one of them? So me from an intellectual point of view, it's my role or my duty or my position to come and say, I wish well for any plan. But at the same time, I'm skeptical that unless there is a mechanism for debate, for discussion, for critique, then a plan could go in a certain direction, and then after 100 billion or 50 billion being wasted, the leader will realize. But if the leader doesn't have all this mechanism, it will go in a certain direction. So is this decision to sell this company the right one or no? Is it 5% or 50%? Where do you put it? In the West? Well, what about if the dollar? What about if this sterling? What about if the currencies change overnight? What about if the yen goes to a certain... How would all of this that you have sold figure out for you? So I think there is a lot that needs to go under public scrutiny. Now you're coming to a point in some of the countries, like in Saudi Arabia, like among others, where you're saying, I'm going to put taxes. There'll be taxes, 10 and 20% on your income. Well, how can I put taxes but you don't have a say in what do I do with these taxes? Maybe I put these taxes and then I utilize this money for a very small elite of people. Or that's where public scrutiny comes. It comes and says, no, we need to look how these taxes are going to our roads, to our electricity, to our water, to our environment, and to our education. Without this, it's not going to work. It will work for a while, but it will not carry us, I think, to the stage that you and I are hoping for. So this is where my critique comes. Okay? Now, on leaders, I believe the future leaders will come out of jail. They are the people who are in jail today. They are the ones who are sentenced 3 years and 5 years and 10 years, and they're in their 20s and early 30s. And I think they will come out of such experiences. The way it happened in Latin America and Eastern Europe. They were in jail, they were in custody, there were several presidents at some points between Brazil and Argentina, etc. Women, actually, who were at some point in jail just for writing or striking or demonstrating or etc. I think they will come from this feel of loss and brutality, and maybe that's how a humanist leader could be produced, rather than leaders who are inheriting leaders and then inheriting and then who have no clue how the population think. Who is the population anyway? Maybe they think the population is the ones in Paris or in somebody in Germany, or haven't really had a connection with the grassroots populations. This is the big challenge today, is how do we get our leaders? And I hope leaders will be elected, and that leaders, those who have power, you can always have kings and queens, and you can always have kings who it's normal, like you have in England, but to have power over a population, it's better to be elected, because you can be accountable, and once you are accountable, then you make mistakes. There is a chance you could go and somebody else could come, and nobody will touch the king, or as in Britain, the queen, or etc. You can establish a system like that, and I see that the Arab world does have such a potential if the reform plan is carried on in the countries that have kings at their helm of leadership.
Taking, as you said, the long...
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry, Irv Plotkin. Taking, as you said, the long view, I'm just arbitrary. I'm going to 1215 and say, let's say, 1,000 years since 1215, the Magna Carta. Europe, both Western and Eastern Europe, for better or worse, and not in a straight line, evolved a democratic government. Yet, whether you include Morocco or not, hardly any Arab country did that. And we're talking now a long, long view. What is the reason for it? Why is there such a stark difference?
Many aspects could explain this. You look at the Arab world, we've lost the 50s and 60s in this Cold War battle, even the 70s. Coming out of colonialism, the model was the Soviet Union and the socialists and etc. So the Arab world went in semi-socialist in some places and capitalist under monarchs in other places. But as this ended, we had a situation where, you see, we were blessed, but we were not blessed to have had two phenomena in the Arab world. The first phenomena is oil. See, oil was able to buy anything and do anything. It can really darken the way you think. It's a lot of dollars on your brain. So oil was able to create a situation by which journalists, writers, middle class, entrepreneurs, companies, all dependent on oil. So in a way, if we're going to go like this Marxist mode of production, we had an oil mode of production for the entire Middle East, and no way you could have a democracy under this mode of production. Because you get somebody that has the power over oil, and it's the state, and I will give you, and you will do a couple of billion, and you will run for it, and I will not give you if you don't say the right thing and do the right thing. And I do that across the Arab world. It's only when the power of oil is becoming less and less and less that the region is going into normal mode of production, into normal way of evolving. So our middle class did not evolve naturally. Our structures did not go naturally. Our socioeconomics, underpinning bases of peasant and country and city, somehow that commodity entered everywhere, every house, and was able to make things deformed. It deformed our structures. So that's one. And I give this a big point. So we have an interest in getting, the less, the more, then great. Then it's going to take us into a normal mode of production, and then you get a middle class that will fight for its battles, that will express its needs, and finally, because before oil, we had that norm. If you go across the region, even under the Ottomans, you had middle classes, but traditional middle classes. So I don't mix it with the modern educated middle class. Traditional middle classes, all the region, they were respected, and they had a name, and they had families behind them, and they were able to stand up to a leader or to a governor, whether it's the Ottomans or whether it's somebody else, and they were able to come even in places where the Ottomans didn't have, like emirs and sheikhs in much of the Gulf. They will come, those notable economic, they will come. We will support you if you do 1, 2, 3, 4. They would pay to the sultan, to the emir, they will pay an income. It's like an income tax. And the role of the sultan or the emir of the ruling family then is to protect them from the nomads and protect them from the desert, while these men would used to go and do business and bring money and come back. That's how Kuwait was. That's how Dubai was. That's why. And there were reform movements in these places. It's with the oil, the state becomes bigger than oil, more powerful than oil, and being a personable state, controlled by a very small group. That's it. Everything has changed. So that's one. The second one, I don't say we were blessed here. We were not blessed to have Israel in the region. Because the creation of Israel militarized the entire Arab world. We would have developed like anybody else in the region. The whole Zionist idea, I look at it, it's a crazy idea. Very, very strange idea. To come and say, I'm going to bring a people after 2,400 years and put them where they belong, based on a certain promise that existed in the books. But Muslims have that, and Christians have that, and everybody. So you bring them in, and where we in the Arab world were opening up, and I'm being very candid and honest, opening up on the West, and our elites are opening up on the West because the West has the liberal democracy that we can learn from. Israel is created by will of force, and by exclusion of Arabs, and by ethnic cleansing. And it was ethnic cleansing. Everyone wanted to return, and they were not allowed back. And that creating a Sparta in the midst of the Arab world that had no military experience, that had no experience with anything. And then suddenly these Arabs had to organize, so they produced military leaders who wanted to fight to avenge what happened in 1948, and we ended up under military dictators later on, under the Ba'ath, among others. So the Israeli side, and then it in a way, Israel and the US. So in a way, we wanted to be liberal, we wanted to be Democrat, but the liberal and the Democrat isn't with us, is against us, is shooting at us, or is excluding us, or is supporting our enemies. And at the end of that, the Arab world didn't go democratic. We're discovering the democratic way through bad, difficult, complicated experience. I believe there is no alternative but a democratic way. Now, it doesn't mean there is only one form of democracy. America is not like England, or maybe England is not like Sweden, different, but it has to be human rights, there has to be democracy, there has to be a sense for everybody to express, there has to be respect for all sections of the population to feel involved, to be part, there has to be involvement, there has to be free speech, there has to be media. Not the fake media, the fake, not the fake media, right? Or with the fake media. I like the fake media. So, it's a good media. I watch CNN, I like what they say recently, and I read the New York Times, and I read the Washington Post. I don't see it fake. I don't know how fake it is. But at least, what I want to say here is that we ended up with this system. Now, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not blaming every Israeli for what happened in 48. I understand there are generations that came that had nothing to do with this. I'm not blaming anybody. But what I am saying that this is a system, Israel, ethnic cleansing, Western, democracy, etc., and the West. So in a way, we became alienated from the West. So in a way, we couldn't. So a liberal like me could not convince the population or people that this is the way, etc. So look at the West, look at what. So in a way, this alienated us from the West. So we in a way became victims of the more extremist ideology. It was easier for us to go extreme. And then on the other hand, we had oil. And you could spread any idea with any amount. Just tell me what idea you want and I will pump some barrels to promote that idea. The idea could be that the earth is not really round, It is flat. And I will pump oil enough. I will put all the oil so you will get convinced. And that's it. And then I'll be able to convince 50 million people that, the earth is flat. So this is, I think, what made us in the Arab world, I believe, different than Latin America, Eastern Europe, and other places. I think there was an optimism at a certain point during the era of colonialism in the 1920s and 30s and 40s that maybe, yes, and there were middle classes being formed and we could move in a certain, but then suddenly with 1948 and then beyond, and oil and the power of all of that, this region suffocated. But finally, this region also, no matter what has happened, is coming back to confront the deep issues it has to confront. Now, on the other hand, because there was the whole story of Palestine, the U.S. is a superpower, but I believe there will be a day the U.S. will not be a superpower. Maybe, if not now, maybe not in my days, but like any power, comes back, goes down, and we're seeing signs. This presidency is such a sign of I don't know what, but it is a sign. So this means when it's not a superpower, it means it's less into the world, maybe less in certain terms, maybe, like Britain did, it will have to find ways to adapt to new economy, new production. It cannot be with a population that consumes so much of the world energy, so much of the world electricity, so much, maybe a simpler life, maybe a different life. But when this happened, the first loser is Israel, with its policy of annexation, ethnic cleansing, etc. Because Israel, Taiwan, places like that are kind of very dependent of this powerful situation as well. And if the Arab world produces a central power, now I'm imagining too much, the Arab world has always produced central powers. We have now 2 central powers in the region, and only 2. If I exclude Israel, I look at 2 indigenous social structured powers with big populations, 70 million and 80 million. We have Iran and we have Turkey. These are the 2 biggest central powers. That's why Iran now is taking advantage of the vacuum in the region to move forward. That's why Turkey is a player. The Arabs are today not a central power. Small players. I think they're squeezed to do something. And I believe at some point there will be an Arab more central, more they'll have to produce something to organize their region. How it will happen, I don't know. By agreement, by other ways, by this and that, but there's something missing. in the region where the states have all collapsed. All the nation states of the Arab world are not doing very well, generally speaking, and the lack of focus on Arabism. Now I'm going to another level. Lack of focus on Arabism, al-Uruba, is making the Arabs, Shi'i and Sunni and Druze and Alawi and Christian and Muslim and from this tribe and from that tribe. I believe Arabism is something to look again at, not necessarily to reproduce it in the same way that Nasser has produced it. It needs a democratic content. It may need a human rights content. It may need semi-Islamist context, the culture, but it really needs a lot of work to bring about some sort of Arab. That's why some of us talk about the need for an Arab project. And if because the nation state taken from the Arab world is failing. I mean, it ends up like 9, 10, 15 different. It's not able to make a glue. The glue then in the 1950s and 60s came with Arabism. You know, that we are all in the Arab world. There was that sense. So how to connect? So there are so many debates today. So what I want to say here is that maybe these are all ideas, but there's so many debates because there is a vacuum, there is a challenge, there are stories, there are narratives, there are issues. With all these debates, some transition, something has to fit to take this region out of its dilemmas. All these debates have to do that we have a problem. Yes, we have a crisis. We should commit suicide or solve it. So we can't go anywhere. So we take Panadol, we take all these painkillers, and we've been doing that in the region. We take all these antidepressants, but then finally we have to deal with it. We go to shrinks, UN comes, it's a big shrink, and we come, and then the World Bank comes, but what if we can't? So I think the debates have to do with the vacuum. And Iran being in the Arab world, the way it is, has to do with the vacuum. And this ISIS has to do with the vacuum. Turkey has to do with the vacuum. The talk about Arabism has to do with the vacuum. The policies of different GCC states has to do with the vacuum. Whatever they are doing, positive or negative. So we're in a big quagmire. And I don't know if I'm giving you anything new in this context. But it's. I mean, may we live in interesting times. Here you are, and if you are in the Middle East, you are in interesting times. Wherever you are on the side, this side or on that side. Yes, and I'm happy to see you, Professor Kelman. Yes, I met him more than 25, 30 years ago, and we've had great dialogue on so many issues. It's a pleasure to see you here.
People talk about Israel having to decide between being a Jewish state and a democratic state. Let's say that there was at some point a one-state solution and Palestinians were integrated to Israel and it became a democratic state and necessarily let go part of the Jewish identity. Would Israel in that situation ever be accepted by the Arab world, or will it never be accepted?
You see, the Arab world, because your question is very interesting, and it carries merit, right? It carries merit. At some point, we may be in that situation. It's a possibility. It's a scenario. It needs a certain type of Israelis, as much as a certain type on the other side. It needs that. But your question on Israel being accepted, the question is, will Israel accept the Palestinians? I mean, that's the first question. Will Israel accept? Because it's really was the more powerful party. It was always the one that rejected the others. It was always the one that took the land of the others. It's always the one that created a lot of harm to the others. The others responded, but they never created any level of harm similar to what the Israelis have created for them in all the Arab-Israeli wars and in all the wars that the Palestinians have waged against the Israeli state. So the question really becomes, from my point of view, is that didn't the Arabs in 2001 come in the Arab summit in 2001 in Beirut and say, we will accept the Israeli state under the condition of a Palestinian state and withdrawal from the borders of 1967, the Israeli occupied territories. Wasn't Sadat the first of the Arabs to go? And I'll tell you something. When Sadat went, and I was against Sadat then, in my youth, and I remember, I was in Lebanon then, and I remember sitting with a group of Lebanese and Palestinians who were on, I would say, not center, even left of center. And the debate was, if Sadat is going to make it, then Assad is next, and the Palestinians are third, and Jordan is after that, and maybe we're going to find a solution, and this region can finally find a way out. If you recall, the way populations in Egypt looked at this initiative in a very positive way at the grassroots level. So there were a lot of times. Look at the Oslo agreements. What brings somebody like Arafat to do Oslo? You tell me he was weaker, but at the same time he could have stayed in Tunisia and said no. He accepted that. He did it with Prime Minister of Israel, Ishaq Rabin, who was assassinated by an extremist who believed that this land is Jewish land. So, and once you lost Rabin, you lost Arafat with him. Because then whoever came afterward was weaker and realized if he or she is going to compromise, they will face the same fate, and that put the way more towards what happened later, the Intifada, among other things. So again, it's not about the Arabs accepting. At some point, the Arabs are pragmatists, are realists. And we have a joint problem. We have a common problem with the Israelis. You've evicted so many Palestinians and you've taken so many lands from the Palestinians. So how do we solve this problem? We keep fighting for another million years, or there is a way. So if there is a way, we look even at the history of negotiations. There was a time in Taba, for instance, that the Palestinians and the Israelis almost got very close to an agreement. But then the Prime Minister of Israel couldn't politically, given the forces within Israeli society that still believe in the messianic vision. And that's made it, and Israel has more power. So acceptance can come, but then under what conditions, and how, and what are you getting in return? So each party can live with it, and not die because of it. And that's, I think, a big challenge at some point. So maybe one day, yes, Israel will come to a point and say, enough of Zionism. I'm defining here Zionism. You need to take more land and keep taking more land and then evicting populations, no Arabs, only Jews, bring them from all over the world, regardless whether they're really Jewish or they just turn to Judaism. It's like me establishing SSA, I'm bringing all the Muslims, whatever. Fine. You've done, it's been done year after year, decade after decade. Is there a time when Israel becomes Israel? And it's a Jewish majority regardless. That's understood. Everybody has to come and recognize, but what about the Arab minority? Maybe my ideal situation, this land can be one land. That's my ideal. And people could be equal citizens. But there could be a Swiss solution. But that needs maybe quite a complex process before we ever get there, where Arabs from all over have a council and Jews have a council, and there is a president, and people can live with each other. But that will be an amazing model for a region that needs that. That will change the history and the future of the region. But we're not yet there, unfortunately. It may take some suffering before we ever understand how to get there. I don't know if I answered your question. That's my, yeah?
I think we're almost out of time anyway. We have kept you busy. Okay, one last question. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Aytaç. I'm from Turkey. I want to ask a question about in the beginning of your speech, you mentioned that in Arab world, two ways, status quo, extremism. Status quo and extremism.
Say that again. I mentioned extremism and?
Or status quo.
Or the status quo.
Yeah,
this is the paradigm by which the Arab world is related.
Okay.
Correct.
As another Muslim country, Turkey, Turkey in that paradigm, what makes the difference for the Turkey?
Oh, the
Not seeing
yes.
extremists or not
Yes.
being a status quo state. If you say
Yes,
if you're
yes.
not
But there are other differences with Turkey and other differences with Iran as well. You see, Turkey was able to evolve institutions and was able to evolve a huge economy as well, a productive economy, not an oil-based economy. Turkey was able to, I mean, it has a parliament, it has a presidency, it has elections, it has a civil society, it has many, many aspects that makes it a stronger state. Democratic, semi-democratic, but not like the rest of the Arab world, which is neither democratic nor institutional. I would have rather be in the Arab world where there are institutions. I mean, the Iranians are not democrats, but they have institutions. They have the council, this, and they have the parliament, they have the president, and they have a group to select the grand ayatollah, and they have the constitutional this, and they have the courts, and they have this, and they somehow, though not democratic, maybe democratic, maybe less than semi-democratic, yet they are able to work out different institutions and powers of in the Arab world. I mean, like in Libya, you only had Gaddafi, and he put his hand on the oil, and he used it the way he wants. It's a very simple version of a political system that we have still in much of the region. So that complexity, that institutionalization, has built a state out of Turkey and has built a state out of Iran. We in the Arab world are still in need of that project, on the one hand. That is independent of how democratic or not democratic, altogether. After all, I mean, Bismarck was a country. I mean, Germany was a country. Democratic, not democratic, then that evolved. So this is a big challenge. So this is how I see Turkey as a different state. It has elections. It has proved over time that it can do changes through elections. It has evolved its institutions. Now it's a presidential. More power to the president. But it can change presidents, and it will change presidents beyond Erdogan. It has a prime minister. It has parties. It has these aspects make a difference at the end of the day for a working structure of a country.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.